I think compassion, wherever it's aroused, is a good thing. It doesn't really matter towards whom it is. The point of generating and developing compassion is to purify our heart in the end, because the more compassion we develop, the more freely it flows to anyone who needs it. And that footballer might be suffering much more than Nelson Mandela, who knows? Every time they lose a match, it's devastating. Every time they get a goal, they're on a high, you know. So I think wherever you find inspiration, wherever you find compassion flows, it's fine. There's no need to judge that. So, but you know, if you can contact that feeling of compassion towards someone who you admire, who's maybe a sports player or a rock star, whatever it is, then see if you can tap into those feelings more and more frequently so that you can develop them towards whoever is around you at that time. So yeah, it's a matter of cultivation within, and the object is not so important, I would say. Yeah. I mean, when we practice the Brahma Viharas as a kind of systematic cultivation, whether it's metta or karuna, compassion, or mudita, we tend to start with a loved person or with ourselves. Sometimes it's really hard to start with ourselves. Traditionally we're supposed to, but it doesn't really matter, you know, as long as whatever gets it going quite easily. And then we move on to, say, a person we have more neutral feelings about. So that is also really valid, because we're trying to dig a bit deeper. You know, we might not have so many vested interests with that person, and in a sense that could then be purer, because we don't expect anything from them, right? And then bit by bit we kind of graduate to the difficult person. So that's the kind of, it's not the place to start. So yeah, if that works for you, I think don't judge it. In a sense, you can say there are different ways that love meets its object, right? Metta is the foundation. Metta is this feeling of benevolence, which is simple goodwill towards all beings, whoever they are. And with that foundation, when love meets suffering, it transforms into compassion. It's basically the same love, but it resonates with a person's suffering. So it's focused on bringing them out of that. It's wishing, rather than saying to somebody, say, who's going through grief, who's clearly unhappy and clearly struggling, you wouldn't say to them, may you be happy, because they're not, right? So it wouldn't feel really appropriate. But you might say, I hope that your pain eases, you know, or your pain will ease in time. What can I do to help you? Yeah. And then with the sympathetic joy, it's like the way love responds when it sees other people happy. So if you actually have genuine goodwill and wish for other people's happiness, you're not going to respond with jealousy or resentment. You're going to be happy for them, you know, because you want their prosperity, you want their well-being. And sometimes we meet situations where we've done everything we can, and you know, we feel we've helped as much as we can, and there's nothing much more we can do. And we have to understand, I mean, especially for a parent, I think, you know, you've brought your children up to be the best they can, you've given them all the opportunities in life, and at some time that child has to leave. They have to leave home, and they have to face all the ups and downs. You know, you can't protect them from relationships going wrong, or you know, sometimes they might not get the job they wish for, and there needs to be a certain perspective on that this is the state of our existence. You know, we can't always be happy, and we're not always going to be sad either. And so there's this sense of equanimity, which is a kind of looking on with acceptance, but not in a detached or cold-hearted or aloof type of way. It's still a kind of love. It's almost like the love that lets things grow and lets things go in their way, in the way they have to go. So it's not like we practice, you can cultivate them all at different times in your practice, but I think, in my experience, it tends to be quite natural. You know, that if you meet somebody who's suffering, you tend to respond with compassion rather than with rejoicing, right? I mean, unless you're some kind of sadist, or is that the right word? So I think they're natural qualities of the heart, but the Buddha is very good at making kind of definitions and, you know, categorizing these things so that we can cultivate them with care. So I hope that makes a bit of sense. Yeah. Certainly people differ in their receptivity, very much so. And I think people have to be ready to hear the Buddha's teachings. Often they need to have gone through a certain amount of suffering and recognise that they do need something to guide them, something to help. Of course, as Buddhists we might think it's obvious that they should turn to Buddhism, but they might not all be inclined that way, right? That's why we have so many religions, so many teachings, so many books and all kinds of things, self-help or psychological approaches to relieve suffering. So in a sense, everyone needs to find their own path. And that receptivity, I mean, it's various reasons. I think the main one is that someone needs to be really ready to say, okay, I need to start looking inside, you know, things outside haven't quite worked and now I need to find out what's going on. At least that was the case for me. But yeah, we can't make a person ready, and we can't ever really know whether this is from past lives or, you know, something in this life or their character or whatever it is. So the Buddha never went there. He never kind of said, well, this is directly because of this thing, you know. He's more interested in seeing karma as something that's happening now, like what kind of response am I having to this particular situation? And that's where we can kind of change our karma, if you like. So we can respond with the 3 right intentions of loving kindness and letting go and compassion, or we can respond to what's arising with a feeling of with being harm, like creating harm, right? Cruelty or ill will or sense desire. So this is where the karma is being made. It's in the present, and I think for us, if we can focus on that and we can focus on cultivating our hearts, then sometimes we don't even need to tell another person this path is a really good path. They start to see the change in us. And because of that, they get attracted and they're ready to hear what you have to say. But I think it's more effective to let them come to that point and try and embody the teachings as best you can, rather than tell them about them. Yeah, and it can take years, it can take decades sometimes. But as long as you're cultivating your heart, then it will have an effect. Yeah. I would suggest that those insights, most often the ones that are going to be valuable, arise from stillness. They arise from the quiet mind, rather than a mind that's necessarily engaged in practices to rouse insight or reflecting on things in a particular way. In my experience, often the insights are felt as a kind of shift. Something softens, or you suddenly realize you've been holding on or you know, going down a certain track that wasn't helpful, and something shifts. So I think rather than try to say, notice the insight and build on it intentionally, for me it's more about seeing how that transforms everyday life, like seeing if that really guides my everyday life. Like you can remember the insight, right? But then how is this affecting me as a person? Like, is it improving my conduct of body, speech and mind? Am I becoming kinder to the people I live with? Is it easier to forgive? Those kind of things show that it's an insight, a valuable insight, and you can build on that insight through your behaviours which follow on from that. So that's one way. I mean, there are obviously insight practices, and I was doing the Vipassana method for at least 16 years intensively, so, you know, and that was very much focused on impermanence. But I have to say that after a certain point, it kind of reached a plateau, because I think the mind starts to expect to see more of the same, in a sense. Even though what I was seeing was that there's no solidity, everything's dissolving, in a way that was quite profound. But I think it's good to try to have different methods from time to time, and I guess for me the blockage was or the way I thought I could go deeper was to still the mind. So I think insight can be in the approach to meditation as well, like an approach of increasingly letting go and trusting the process to unfold, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think maybe there's a step in between feeling the disappointment and trying to have compassion for them, which is to respond to your own disappointment by giving it value, in a sense, like by really feeling it fully and finding that compassionate response, because it is hurtful, and especially if this is something that happens often. It's not good to bypass our own feelings. We need to acknowledge them and give them care, give them kindness. And, you know, if there's anger, well, okay, let me see anger, you know, come in, let me get to know you. See if you can welcome it as a friend. Because the more we kind of feel these shouldn't come in and, you know, these are bad people that we have to keep out, the more they have power over us. So it's natural to feel those things. And our, I suppose the role of compassion is to be able to hold space for that and allow them to dissolve in their own time, but through wisdom, through meeting them and understanding, yeah, this is hurting, and perhaps feeling into what's underneath some of that. You know, often under anger or irritation is a sense of maybe feeling not valued, or a sense of, yeah, like disappointment or fear or just sadness, right? So once we start to meet those emotions and give them compassion and we feel heard, I think then it's natural that we'll start to forgive the other person. But don't forget yourself. Yeah, go to yourself first of all, I would say. Yeah. And then, you know, when you are in a more balanced state of mind and you do feel that you're healed from that particular thing, you can ask yourself, well, what do I want and what do I deserve? I actually would like to ask this person to please think carefully before they make a commitment, because it hurts when it's broken. And if you're in a place of compassion, then your words will be much more less loaded, less likely to elicit a defensive response. And you'll feel that you're a good ally to yourself. Yeah. I do think fulfilling our commitments is part of right speech. You know, if we say we're going to do something, then we do our best to actually fulfill it. So the other thing we can learn from these situations is, because it hurts us, we'll try not to do that to others. So we become more trustworthy and committed and loyal as a result.